Imagine giving away the only meal you had for the day, not knowing if you'd even eat again. This is the story of a teenager whose kindness led to a twist no one saw coming, and a moment that will leave you speechless. Stick around, because the ending will make you believe in the power of doing good. Before we jump into this unforgettable story, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more inspiring stories that prove even the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes. The streets were alive with noise. Cars honked, people hurried, their faces focused on their own worlds. Among the crowd, a man sat slumped against a brick wall. His clothes were tattered, his face weary, and beside him a small dog curled up tightly as if trying to disappear. The man held a cardboard sign close to his chest. On it, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Hungry, anything helps." He glanced up at the passing faces, his voice soft, barely audible. "Can anyone help?" he murmured. But the flow of people didn't stop. They moved around him as though he didn't exist. The dog shifted, letting out a small whine. The man stroked its head, his hands trembling slightly. His eyes scanned the crowd, but no one met his gaze. A man in a suit walked by, stepping so close that his shoe grazed the edge of the sign. He didn't slow down. A group of teenagers laughed as they passed, one of them throwing a crumpled paper cup into the trash nearby. No one noticed him. No one cared. The man's lips tightened as he adjusted his position on the hard concrete. Time dragged on, and the world around him blurred into a haze of movement and noise. The weight of his situation hung heavy, but he remained there, holding on to hope. Just a small act of kindness, he thought. Just one person to see him. And then someone did. Jalen walked home from school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. In his hand he carried a plastic bag with warm takeout, the scent of fried chicken escaping through the folds. He glanced down at his watch. His mother would be waiting, tired from her long shift, and this meal was her only real chance to rest for the day. As he rounded the corner, his eyes caught sight of the man sitting on the sidewalk. The dog moved first, its small head lifting to glance at Jalen. The man sat motionless, his sign resting against his knees. The words were simple but heavy. Hungry. Anything helps. Jalen stopped. For a moment he thought about just walking past. He didn't have much himself, but something held him in place. He looked at the plastic bag in his hand, then back at the man. The man's voice broke the silence. "Spare change?" he asked, his tone almost apologetic. Jalen hesitated, gripping the bag tighter. This food wasn't just for him. His mom had counted on it. But the man's tired eyes and the way his dog shifted nervously tugged at something inside him. He knelt down, ignoring the hurried footsteps of people passing behind him. "Hey, sir," Jalen said. "I don't have money, but, I could share this with you." The man blinked, taken aback. "No, son," he said, shaking his head. "That's your food. Keep it." Jalen smiled faintly, opening the bag. "It's all right, you can have half. Or, actually, here." He pulled out the entire box, holding it out. "Take it. Your dog looks like he needs it more than I do." The man hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the food. "You sure?" he asked, his voice cracking. Jalen nodded. "I'll be fine. Besides, my mom always says there's more joy in giving." The man looked at him for a long moment, then down at the food in his hands. "You're the first person today who even stopped to look at me," he said quietly. "People walk by like I'm nothing. But you didn't even think twice." Jalen shrugged, standing up. "I know what it's like," he said. "Me and my mom, we've been through tough times too. It's not easy, but someone helped us out when we needed it. I'm just paying it forward." The man nodded slowly, still holding the box. "You've got a good heart, kid. Thank you. What's your name?" "Jalen," he said, flashing a small grin. "And you?" "Grayson," the man replied. His voice softened as he added, "You've made my day." Jalen glanced down at the dog, whose tail wagged faintly. He crouched again, patting its head. "Take care of him, Mr. Grayson. And yourself." As Jalen walked away, his steps felt lighter despite the emptiness in his hands. He didn't know why, but he felt better leaving with nothing than he would have with that meal. And though he didn't look back, Mr. Grayson's gaze followed him long after he disappeared from view. As Jalen disappeared into the crowd, Mr. Grayson remained where he sat, the box of food resting in his lap. The dog sniffed at it eagerly, but Mr. Grayson's mind was elsewhere. He glanced around at the street, at the people rushing by, at the countless faces that hadn't even paused to see him. All day long, he had been invisible, except to one person: Jalen. The boy's kindness lingered in his thoughts. It wasn't just the food. It was the way Jalen had spoken to him, looked at him, like he mattered. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had treated him with such respect. He sighed and leaned back against the wall, stroking the dog's head. "You're a good kid, Jalen," he murmured to himself. As the city lights flickered on and the street emptied, Grayson let his mind drift back to a different time. Years ago, his life had been far from this corner. He had sat in a leather chair in a high-rise office, staring out over the skyline. He had built an empire in investments, and money had flowed in like water. But it had all come at a cost. Betrayals from friends he trusted, cutthroat deals that left others ruined. He had walked away from it all, unable to stomach what he had become. He had wealth but no peace, success but no trust in anyone. His reflections were interrupted by the memory of Jalen's voice. "My mom always says there's more joy in giving." Those words stayed with him as he watched the boy walk away earlier. Something stirred within him. An idea, a plan. Grayson wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew he had to act. The next day, Grayson sat in the same spot. The dog, more relaxed now, stretched out beside him. Grayson's eyes scanned the street until he saw a familiar face. Jalen was walking toward him again, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, kid," Grayson called out. Jalen hesitated, surprised to see the man again, but he approached with a curious smile. "Morning, Mr. Grayson," Jalen said. "How's your dog?" Grayson chuckled, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Happy, thanks to you. That food you gave us yesterday, it made all the difference." Jalen shrugged. "I'm glad it helped." Grayson's eyes softened. "Kindness like yours doesn't come around often," he said. "It deserves something extraordinary." Jalen tilted his head, unsure what to make of the comment. "I just did what felt right," he said. "That's all." Grayson nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Well, you're rare, Jalen. Don't forget that." Jalen shifted on his feet, sensing something unusual about the man's tone. But before he could say more, Grayson waved him off with a casual, "Go on now, don't be late for school." As Jalen walked away, Grayson picked himself up. For the first time in a long while, he had a purpose driving him forward. He began to follow Jalen, keeping a safe distance. He wasn't trying to scare the boy. He simply needed to know more. Grayson observed Jalen's routine. He watched him stop to talk to the shopkeeper at a corner store, picking up small groceries with what little money he had. He noticed how Jalen greeted his neighbors warmly, even helping an elderly woman carry her bags up a flight of stairs. Every action reinforced what Grayson had seen in him the day before: selflessness, humility, and a goodness that seemed untouched by the hardships he was clearly facing. Later that evening, Grayson found himself standing across the street from an old apartment building. He watched Jalen climb the steps, pausing to unlock a door that led to a dimly lit hallway. The boy disappeared inside, and Grayson stayed there for a long moment, his mind racing. What was Jalen's life really like, and how could someone with so little give so much? Grayson turned and walked away, a plan forming in his mind. He didn't know all the answers yet, but he was determined to find them. Jalen pushed the door open to the small apartment he called home. The space was quiet, save for the faint sound of a television in the next room. His mother, Denise, was seated at the kitchen table, her uniform from the diner still on. She looked up with a tired smile. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm but laced with exhaustion. "How was school?" Jalen shrugged as he set his backpack down. "Same as always. How was work?" Denise's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly masked it. "It's work," she said lightly. "Bills don't pay themselves." Jalen glanced at the stack of envelopes on the counter, the bold red "Final" notice stamped on top of one. The sight made his chest tighten, but but he didn't say anything. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of loose change, placing it on the table. "It's not much," he said, "but I can do a few more shifts at the corner store this weekend." Denise's hand covered his. "You're doing more than enough, Jalen. Just focus on school. We'll get through this." In the next room, Jalen's younger sister Amina was scribbling in a notebook. She looked up as Jalen entered, her face lighting up. "Jalen, can you help me with my math homework?" she asked, holding out her book. He nodded, sitting down beside her. As they worked through the problems, Amina sighed. "I need a new backpack. This one's falling apart," she said, gesturing to the frayed straps on the floor. Jalen didn't respond immediately, but he made a mental note. She deserved more than what they could give her right now, but he'd find a way to help. The next day, Jalen was outside when he noticed a neighborhood kid struggling with a broken bike. The boy, no older than 10, looked frustrated as he jiggled the chain. Jalen approached with a grin. "Need a hand?" The boy nodded eagerly. Within minutes, Jalen had the bike upright and the chain fixed. The boy beamed. "Thanks, Jalen," he said before riding off. Jalen watched him go, feeling a small sense of pride. He didn't have much, but helping others made the weight of his own struggles feel lighter. That evening, as Jalen returned home, he found a small envelope lying at the doorstep. His name was written on it in neat handwriting. Curious, he opened it and found a note inside. It read, "For your kindness." Attached to the note was a stack of crisp bills. $500. Jalen stared at the money, his mind racing. He stepped inside, showing the envelope to Denise. "Did someone leave this for us?" he asked. She nodded. "We couldn't find anything else for them. There's no trace other than our pocket watches." Denise's eyes widened as she looked at the money. "I didn't hear anything. Who would do this?" Jalen hesitated. He thought of Mr. Grayson. It had to be him. But why? The next morning, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, the money spread out in front of him. Amina was in the next room, humming softly as she drew. Denise had left early for work. Jalen's thoughts were conflicted. They needed this money, desperately. But accepting it felt strange. He didn't even know Mr. Grayson well. Finally, he made a decision. Later that day, he went to the grocery store, buying enough food to stock their pantry and still having some money left. Instead of keeping it, Jalen used the rest to help 2 struggling families in the neighborhood. He handed out bags of food, smiling as the families thanked him. From a distance, Mr. Grayson watched. Hidden near the edge of the block, he saw Jalen giving away the groceries, the $500 now transformed into hope for others. Grayson's lips curled into a faint smile. This was exactly what he needed to see. But his plan wasn't finished yet. He had more in store for Jalen, a final test that would reveal the boy's true heart. Jalen was walking home from the store when he spotted Mr. Grayson sitting on a park bench. The man looked different today. Though still dressed in worn clothes, his posture seemed more upright, his demeanor more confident. The dog lay beside him, wagging its tail lazily as Jalen approached. "Mr. Grayson," Jalen called out, stepping closer. The man turned and smiled warmly. "Jalen, good to see you, son." "Oh." Jalen sat on the bench beside him, pulling out a small bag of snacks he had just bought. He handed one to Mr. Grayson without hesitation. "I wanted to thank you," Jalen said. "For the envelope." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "What envelope?" he asked with a playful smirk, but Jalen wasn't fooled. "I know it was you," Jalen insisted. "But you didn't have to do that. We're okay. You should have kept it for yourself." Grayson leaned back, studying the boy's face. "Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest rewards," he said quietly. Jalen frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Grayson smiled but didn't answer. Instead, he stood, patting Jalen on the shoulder. "You'll see," he said cryptically before walking away with his dog. Jalen watched him go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. There was something about Mr. Grayson that didn't quite add up. Later that evening, Jalen was heading home, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He had just finished helping a neighbor carry groceries and felt good about the day's small victories. But as he turned down a quieter street, 2 men emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hard, their intentions clear. Kid," one of them said, stepping closer. "What you got in that bag?" Jalen froze, clutching his backpack tighter. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just school stuff." The second man sneered. "Don't lie to us. Hand it over." Before Jalen could react, one of them grabbed the bag while the other shoved him to the ground. He tried to fight back, but they were bigger, stronger. Within moments, they were gone, leaving Jalen bruised and empty-handed. He sat there on the pavement, staring at the spot where his bag used to be. Inside had been the small amount of money he was saving for his family. When he finally made it home, his mother saw the scraped skin on his hands and the torn sleeve of his shirt. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to him. Jalen shook his head. "It's fine," he said quietly. But inside, he felt the weight of the setback. Every step forward seemed to come with another push back. But he reddened his face with salt and pepper shot. A few days later, Jalen was sitting at the kitchen table helping Amina with her homework, when there was a knock at the door. Denise answered it, and Jalen heard her voice, surprised and cautious. "Can I help you?" Jalen walked to the door to see Mr. Grayson standing there, but this time he was unrecognizable. Gone were the ragged clothes and tired expression. He wore a sharp suit, his hair neatly combed, and in his hand was a sleek briefcase. The small dog was nowhere in sight. "Mr. Grayson?" Jalen asked, his voice filled with confusion. Grayson smiled. "May I come in?" Denise looked at Jalen, unsure, but he nodded. She stepped aside and Grayson entered, taking a seat in their modest living room. Denise sat across from him, her posture tense, while Amina peeked out from behind the kitchen counter. "Jalen," Grayson began, "you've been kind to me in ways most people wouldn't even consider, and I believe it's time you knew the truth." Jalen exchanged a glance with his mother. The truth about what? Grayson opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick envelope. He handed it to Jalen, who hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check. $50,000. Jalen's hands shook as he stared at the number. What is this?" he stammered. He got no further before he was met with another heavy fall, sending him crashing halfway up the stairs. Allah put his hand to his lips. Grayson leaned forward, his tone calm and steady. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not homeless. I'm a retired investor who's been fortunate enough to earn more money than I could ever spend. But I lost faith in people along the way. Greed and selfishness made me step away from it all. Recently I decided to test humanity. I wanted to see if there were still good people left in this world." He paused, his gaze steady on Jalen. "You, Jalen, restored my faith. You gave what little you had to someone you thought had nothing. That kind of selflessness is rare, and it deserves to be rewarded." Denise gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Amina peeked around the corner, her eyes wide. Jalen sat frozen, the check still in his hands. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Say you'll accept it," Grayson said. "Use it for your family, for your future, and keep being the person who made me believe in humanity again." Jalen sat frozen on the couch, the check still in his hands. His mother, Denise, stared at it in disbelief before her emotions broke through. She covered her face, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "You've saved us." She turned to Mr. Grayson, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I don't even know how to say it. We were about to lose everything. I've tried so hard, but—" Her words faltered as she wiped her eyes. "But Jalen has always believed that kindness comes back to you. He learned that from me, but honestly I think he's the one teaching me now." Jalen glanced at his mother, then back at Mr. Grayson. "This is too much," he said firmly, setting the check down on the table. "There are people out there who need this more than we do." Grayson leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Jalen," he said, "this is for you and your family. I'm not asking for anything in return. Your kindness inspired me to believe in people again. That's worth more to me than anything money could buy." Jalen hesitated, his sense of humility wrestling with the reality of their situation. Finally he nodded, his voice soft. "If it's really okay, I'll use it to help others too." Grayson smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "That's all I could hope for." The next day, Jalen began putting the money to use. He paid off the overdue rent, giving his family a sense of security they hadn't felt in months. Amina finally got a new backpack and the school supplies she had been wishing for. But Jalen didn't stop there. He walked through the neighborhood, visiting families he knew were struggling. To one single mother he gave groceries to last a month. To an elderly man down the street he paid for home repairs. Every act of giving brought him more joy, just as his mother had always taught him. Denise watched him with pride, knowing her son's heart was as strong as ever. "You're doing good, Jalen," she said one evening. "You're making a difference." Jalen smiled. "That's what this is all about." Several weeks later, Mr. Grayson invited Jalen to meet him at a downtown office building. Jalen arrived, unsure of what to expect. Grayson greeted him warmly and led him into a bright, bustling office filled with people of all ages and backgrounds working together. "This," Grayson said, gesturing around the room, "is my nonprofit. We focus on helping underprivileged communities with education, housing, and job opportunities. And I want you to be part of it." Jalen's eyes widened. "Me? How?" Grayson handed him a folder. Inside were details for an internship, one that came with a stipend, mentorship, and the chance to make a real impact. "You've already shown that you understand what it means to help others," Grayson said. "I want to give you the tools to do even more." Jalen hesitated. "Why me?" Grayson's smile grew softer. "Because you reminded me of who I used to be, and you showed me who I still want to become. One day, you'll understand how much that matters." Jalen took the folder, his mind racing. He couldn't fully grasp what this opportunity meant, but he knew one thing: it was a chance to grow, to help, and to honor the lessons his mother had taught him. As Grayson walked him out of the office, Jalen glanced back at the bustling workspace. For the first time in a long while, he felt like his future wasn't just a distant hope. It was right in front of him, waiting to be built. The days that followed brought a transformation Jalen's family never imagined possible. With the eviction notice now a thing of the past, Denise packed up their small apartment. Amina squealed with joy as Jalen helped her carry boxes into their new home. A cozy space filled with light, laughter, and a sense of security they hadn't felt in years. In the living room, Jalen set up a study desk for Amina, complete with brand new school supplies. She hugged him tightly, her smile brighter than ever. "You're the best brother," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Meanwhile, Jalen continued to pay forward the kindness he had received. On weekends, he organized small food drives in the neighborhood, gathering donations to help others like his family. He fixed bikes, tutored kids, and listened to anyone who needed a friend. His actions inspired others, and soon, a community that had once felt divided began to grow closer. As for Mr. Grayson, he visited Jalen's family from time to time, always watching with pride as the boy he once tested continued to flourish. Jalen's resilience and generosity had given Grayson a renewed sense of purpose, and he knew his investment in this young man's future had been the right choice. Oh, that his actions had made such a difference, impactful enough to change the world. It was the act of kindness turned a ripple into a wave, changing lives in ways no one could have imagined. From a struggling family to a neighborhood uplifted, Jalen's story reminds us all that even the smallest gestures can spark the greatest transformations. What would you do if you met someone in need? How far would kindness take you? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread kindness and make a difference, one small act at a time. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How can we inspire each other to do good today?